Hello again to another Agakala React, and today is 17th February, and on 17th February 1936, the world's first superhero, the Phantom, a cartoon strip by Lee Falk, makes his first appearance in comics. So be watching the history of the Phantom from Variant Comics. Let's just go, let's just see. I don't know much about Phantom, I do have to say that. So, yeah, let's see what happened.
What's up, my comic comrades? Today is the start of us covering heroes from the pulp magazine era, like the Shadow and the Spider. And then characters who walk the line of pulp heroes and your more commonplace comic book heroes. And the Phantom is definitely a character that walks that line, as he's kind of a transitional character, since he has characteristics of pulp magazine era heroes, but also a lot of characteristics from comic book heroes like Spider-Man and Flash. At this point, a lot of you may be like, what the heck are pulp magazines, or the pulps eras? Well, they were very cheap magazines that were published from the late 1800s to the late 1950s, and their characters and heroes had very specific traits. They were usually dark and very detective driven, but in any case, you're here to learn about the Phantom, one of my favorite characters from this era. And he's a very good one to start with, as he eventually crossed over into mainstream comics, being published by DC Comics. So let's learn about the Phantom's history, aka the Ghost That Walks.
The Ghost That Walks, huh?
The Phantom was created by Lee Falk and first appeared in February of 1936 in the Singh Brotherhood, a daily newspaper comic strip. It took Falk about 2 months to come up with and draw the first 2 weeks of sample strips. He drew inspiration from the Phantom from different myths and legends like the well-known King Arthur and several other fictional characters such as Tarzan and Zorro. Originally, the Phantom was a rich playboy, but later stories moved the Phantom to the jungle, making him more of a myth and legend. Now, as you could imagine, even back then in the early 1900s, there were several characters that carried the name Phantom, like the Phantom Detective, and of course, the Phantom of the Opera. So he originally thought about naming the Phantom Grey Ghost. That's right, like the now famous Grey Ghost from Batman the Animated Series, voiced by the late great Adam West. In any case, he ultimately didn't care that other characters had the name Phantom in their name. So he went with the name, The Phantom. Fun fact, Lee Falk and the Phantom are actually credited by many to be responsible for superheroes like Batman, Green Lantern, Wally West, Flash, and more for having white eyes and no pupils. He certainly did it before all DC and Marvel characters, as again, the Phantom was created in 1936, which predates all DC and Marvel characters. Falk actually mentioned once in a documentary that he was inspired by Greek busts for the idea of the Phantom's pupils not being shown through his mask. And I gotta say, the man was right. It makes heroes and villains look way more badass and otherworldly. He also mentioned that the skin-tight costume was inspired by Robin Hood, who wore skin-tight costumes in the movies and play adaptations. It's very interesting stuff as far as where the origins of superhero costumes came from. But now that you know a little bit more about the Phantom's real-world creation, let's get into his comic book origin. Now, the Phantom's origin is rather straightforward, as a lot of things were back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. It's funny because as the decades went on, especially when the 70s, 80s, and 90s hit, is when comic books started going back and giving these beloved characters rich and vast backstories, adding to their mythos. Now, I'm not saying they never expanded on characters' backstories prior to that. I'm just saying that's when it really started to ramp up. Publishers were like, oh, this character is really successful. Maybe we should expand their backstory, which is why, as I often say, and I'm sure many of you notice, we don't get a character's origin or backstory sometimes until several issues in or even way longer. But I digress. The point is, the Phantom's origin is super straightforward. Anyway, it all started during the 16th century. During this time, a man named Christopher Walker was sailing the seas of Africa with his father. But if you know anything about sailing, especially back then, it's not the safest thing for many reasons, but in this case because they were attacked by pirates. And unfortunately, only young Christopher survived. He would then be washed up onto Bengalan Beach. Anyway, once he washed up on the beach, he then took his father's skull and swore an oath upon it, which goes as follows. I swear to devote my life to the destruction of piracy, greed, cruelty, and injustice, and my sons and their sons shall follow me. Yeah, this guy is kind of hardcore, but just like that, the first Phantom was born. But now, friends, it's time to move on to story arcs and publication history. Now, the Phantom is a character who has been printed globally, having stories across the world like Australia, New Zealand, India, and more. But since he originated and was created in the United States, that's what we're going to focus on. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, the Phantom was originally a newspaper comic strip, but during the 1940s, those strips were reprinted into comic format at Ace Comics. The Phantom would make his first appearance at Ace Comics in Ace Comics issue 11, which was his first appearance in an actual comic book. Anyway, as you're about to see, the Phantom loves to jump around to different comic publishers because once the 1950s rolled around, the rights to publish the Phantom went over to Harvey Comics. Then in 1962, Gold Key Comics took over, followed by King Comics in 1966, and then Charlton Comics in 1969. And it's here he would stay, at least for a little while. From 1962 to 1977, a total of 74 Phantom comic books were published, the majority of which came from Charlton.
How does that work, that they're jumping from one to another?
The 1996 movie where the Phantom is played by Billy Zane.
Billy Zane, there you go.
I still love it. There's just so much nostalgia attached to it. You see, the Phantom is just an ordinary human, as we know from the origin I told you a little bit ago. Again, he's just a kid who swore an oath on his father's skull to fight injustice. And when he grew up, he would become the Phantom and would marry a woman of royal blood. They would then have sons, and most of them would be named Kit Walker. Then when the father Phantom became too old, he would retire, and his son would take his place as the new Phantom, swearing the oath as his father before him. Then when the father died, he would be buried inside of a secret burial chamber that resided inside of the Skull Cave. And this would repeat for every generation, thus giving the illusion that the Phantom is a ghost, as he's been around for over 400 years. The lineage of the Phantom is actually the coolest aspect of the character for me. It's just awesome that it tricks everyone into thinking he's immortal, or that he's a ghost that walks. What's also pretty cool is not only the son can become a Phantom, there's also been female Phantoms, as sometimes the daughter would take on the mantle of the Phantom in a similar outfit. This way, whether that particular Phantom had sons or daughters, the Phantom lives on, becoming a jungle legend. And the most notable of these female Phantoms was Julia Walker. She was the twin sister of the 17th Phantom. But with that said, to continue the point proving the Phantom really does get around, DC's first comic book was initially a 4-issue miniseries written by Peter David and
there's
Mike
a
Gold,
DC
but it was
version
followed
of
by
it
a
too?
13-issue series by Mark Verheiden. The DC comic Phantom titles are some of my favorite Phantom stories, but admittedly, that may be because that was what I was able to get my hands on as a kid. Now, I know what you're asking, has the Phantom ever had a Marvel comic series? And yes,
really?
Yes, he has, my comic comrades. It came in the form of a 3-issue miniseries titled The Phantom, The Ghost Who Walks. It featured the 22nd Phantom, who had a high-tech updated costume. Most notably were his high-tech gloves or gauntlets. They were kind of similar to Batman's gauntlets, where they could be used to help him break into things and give him computer readouts. Basically, they enhanced his abilities and just look cool. Around this time, the Phantom was given a cartoon series titled Phantom 2040, which I remember seeing episodes of here and there as a kid, but it was nothing I watched consistently. Either way, Spider-Man co-creator Steve Ditko would pencil a 4-issue miniseries based off of this cartoon. So if there was ever a Phantom series to look into, the Steve Ditko stuff is definitely one of them, because Steve Ditko. Anyway, the Phantom would continue to jump around from publisher to publisher, going to Moonstone Books, getting several books published there for the next few years, before ending up at Dynamite Entertainment, where he would get yet another monthly comic book series titled The Last Phantom. And then in 2014, the Phantom would end up at Hermes Press, where he would get another miniseries written by Peter David. As for how many Phantoms there's been throughout the lineage, there's been 22. Yeah, that is a lot of Phantoms. I can't think of another comic character who's had that many people take up the mantle of something. It's pretty insane, but now it's time for powers and abilities.
Well, he's just a human, isn't he?
The Phantom is just an ordinary guy who swore an oath to fight crime after his father was murdered. It sounds kind of familiar, but I can't think of another character's origin who is similar. But if that character existed, he'd be created after the Phantom and become way more popular. But back to the Phantom's abilities. He's just a normal person, and every version of the Phantom is trained from birth in multiple forms of martial arts as well as athletic disciplines. Because of this, the Phantom is fast, agile, strong, and flexible. Pretty much, he's in the best shape humanly possible. Every Phantom is also a master marksman, being extensively trained in all weapons, especially firearms. And because of this, as you would assume, the Phantom almost never misses his target. Every Phantom in the lineage wears a belt that holds weapons, most notably 2 holsters to have a gun for each hand. For example, the 21st Phantom carried around 2 .45s attached to his belt. The Phantom also wears 2 rings, one on each hand. The ring that he wears on his left hand features a cross-like insignia known as the Good Mark. Those who he touches with it are under the Phantom's protection. The mark itself is even said to give the wearer good luck. On his right hand, he wears a skull ring, and those that receive this mark, which is usually by a punch to the face, are branded in the Phantom's wrath, along with bad luck seemingly following them everywhere. So much so, there's old jungle sayings about him, such as, the Phantom has 1,000 eyes and 1,000 ears, and nobody argues with the Phantom and wins. Or how about, better to stare into the tiger's eyes than into the cold eyes of the angry Phantom. And my favorite, the voice of the angry Phantom freezes a tiger's blood. So very cool. But now, it's time for reading recommendations. The easiest way to check out the Phantom is by reading several of his collected editions, such as The Phantom, the Complete Series, The King Years, The Phantom, the Complete Series, Volume 2, The Gold Key Years, The Phantom, the Complete Series, Volume 1, The Charlton Years, and lastly, both Phantom series by DC Comics.
buy list.
First up for the week of September 16th, we have Immortal Hulk issue 37. When Bruce Banner first came to Shadow Base, he was cut into pieces and stored in jars. Now Shadow Base is under his control, but Bruce Banner was only the second test subject. Now, the first one is free. Second on our list this week is Bloodshot issue 8. Unthinkable monsters are unleashing hell on Earth, surrounded by enemies. Who can Bloodshot trust? Next up, we have Batman issue 99, Joker War Part 5. Things have changed as Batman realizes he can't fight this war alone. He's going to need help. Before he faces down the Joker, he must call on his trusty partner Dick Grayson, but can Dick reclaim his lost memories in time to join the battle?
Wait, what's going on there?
Star Wars Darth Vader issue 6, A Quest for Truth, A Journey of Destruction. Darth Vader's search for revenge against those who hid his son Luke reaches a terrible climax at the tomb of Padme Amidala. What secrets does he learn, and who will pay as a result? All these answers will be found in the ruins
Damn, I want to read that.
The birthplace of Luke Skywalker. And last but certainly not least, we have Thor issue 7. This has been one of the best ongoing titles of the year, with incredible writing and some epic moments that is rewriting certain aspects of the Marvel Universe. If you're not reading this book, you need to get on that. We also recapped issues 5 and 6 in one of last week's episodes, and you can find the link for that in the comment section below.
And just like that, that brings today's episode of Variant to a close. But if you like today's episode, be sure to check out that one right here. And if you like our channel,
that was I don't know what to say about it, because I'm gonna repeat myself saying interesting, because it was interesting. Yeah, okay. So anyway, I think I've seen the Phantom with Billy Zane in it when I was a kid. I'm not entirely sure. I might have, or I didn't. Obviously I've seen Billy Zane in other things, so that's how I recognize the face. What else? It's just like, yeah, it's very similar to like Batman, but honestly it is similar, but it isn't similar. Like, this is kind of like going from father to son, from to the child, and keep going, and for 400 years. So that is a really different story of a superhero, isn't it? Yeah. Did you watch a lot of things about Phantom or read the comic books or something like that? By the way, how does it work that just going from one publisher to another? I understand if they, let's say, a publisher bankrupted, but what about the fact that there was something in DC and then there was something in Marvel as well? Like, I'm confused. Alright, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!